You'd have thought that, with Farage being, in Parliament, that there would be a very loud furore about any suggestion that Britain was losing its sovereignty or that it wasn't, taking back control or Brexit was being betrayed by Starmer and his EU cohort. Instead, he's very quiet indeed. He's very, very quiet indeed. In fact, most of the biggest Brexit critics have gone very, very quiet indeed. Even Daniel Hannan, who would used to write weekly columns about how amazing and wonderful Brexit would be, has gone very quiet indeed on the subject. So why is this? What's happening? Well, at the moment, you've got the EU alignment, which, by the way, also going very well indeed at the moment. Very nice indeed. Pretty much, well, not to say I didn't call it, but I will be doing a couple of victory laps when it all happens. So get ready for that one. But yeah, it does seem to be going very, very much in a very good and positive direction. Well, of course, it's not fully, joining, the single market or the customs union or, rejoining the EU. Hey, it's a step at least in the right direction. So why then are all these critics now silent about something which they so passionately used to crow from the very ceiling about? Well, that's because partly political opinion has changed in it, as well as public opinion as well. Not only that, but the Brexiteers are not in power anymore. Someone else is. Someone else has now access to all that data. Kind of embarrassing if you were to, I don't know, do something very pro-Brexity and all of a sudden out comes someone from Labour saying, well, actually, that's not true. Look at this data I have to back up all this. So, as always, thank you very much to all those people who do, of course, help and support the channel. Like I say, click on the links down below. There's a like, the share, the subscribe button. Of course, don't forget to ring the bell as well. So when you drop a new video or we go live or anything like that. And of course, as always, there are links down below. There's the Patreon page, there's the Buy Me Coffee link, there's the YouTube thank you button. And of course, as always, there's the YouTube membership button down below as well. So let's crack on then into this. On The Guardian, talking about this as well. Critics now of a closer trading alignment with the EU seem to be losing their voice. When asked back in 2020 whether the UK would accept aligning now with EU business regulations, Michael Gove, the then Cabinet Office Minister, said very bluntly, "We will not trade away our sovereignty." Sitting, of course, next to his Labour successor, Nick Thomas-Symonds, on Wednesday, the now editor of The Spectator was now more circumspect. When, of course, asked, if he accepted Thomas-Symonds' argument that the so-called dynamic alignment was now good for the economy, Gove just replied with a smile and say, "I will wait to see the details before making a definitive judgment." Underpinning's Gove's response was, of course, not just the politeness now of a host. Thomas-Symonds, of course, gave his speech at the Spectator premises, but, of course, a realization that voters have now moved on since 2020. Thomas-Symonds' speech was, of course, the most assertively pro-European he has ever given since entering government and last year's Keir Starmer's chief European negotiator. The Cabinet Office, and even ministers, he wanted to sign a deal to export food and drink products to the EU without boundaries, something that the government says would generate £5.1 million a year for economic benefits by 2040. Small businesses currently pay a £200 license fee every time they want to export something like a shipment of agricultural goods. This cost the government is now promised now to eliminate. But he also talked openly about the benefits of accepting EU standards for the foreseeable future, even if the UK, as now says, it has no say in setting them, saying, "We can see that by starting to reduce the checks now on the Irish Sea, which have now clearly benefited to trade," he argued. Most eye-catchingly, of course, was that after months of being coy over the prospect of a youth mobility scheme with the EU, Thomas-Symonds embraced now the possibility with open arms. Like I say, very good progress indeed on that one. He said, when you are, of course, providing these opportunities for young British people, I am very excited about the scheme, he said. I think it's going to be fantastic. He also insisted that the debate had now changed since Gove helped lead the successful Leave campaign, saying that last week was GCSE result today, and young people opening the envelopes helped decide and shape now their future, he said. Most of them weren't even 8 years old when the referendum happened. That era is now gone. If Gove's, of course, silence on dynamic alignment was, of course, notable, the reluctance of Nigel Farage to get drawn into this debate has even more been so. So think about that. You've got Gove, who was pretty much almost one of like the main big flag carriers for like the pro Brexit conservatives. If he's got nothing to say, if the most he has to say on it is, oh well, I'll just wait and see what happens, while agreeing with some of the arguments that is being made for the EU reset and some of this stuff, which previously Gove would have argued vociferously against. Kind of interesting to see just how much we have changed. And I've talked about this before, that there had to be at least a change in public mood. And we've seen that. And I've said this many times before on this channel. This has happened a lot quicker than anyone thought, than even anyone suspected. People said we would not be here at this point where we are with now a public mood on this until maybe even at least 2030, maybe even 2035, that we were a long way off from that originally. But now, no, we're here in 2025 with that public perception a lot sooner. So that's a good thing. And now this is why you can get this going. Is there any pushback against this? Seemingly not, because this is good. This is good for our economy. As you saw there, 5.1 billion by 2040. That is good. If we can eliminate that £200 crossing fee for small businesses for agricultural products, that will be very good. We're going to be probably accepting an EU youth mobility scheme, something which we have talked about all the time, which the government has always been, well, we might not. Here we have the chief negotiator saying, yeah, we'll do that. You know, gee, it's not like all of this I had been saying for quite a while. People had been saying that'll never happen. Anyway, back to this. So, back in, of course, May, when Starmer had, of course, announced his outline agreement with the EU, Farage was, of course, not even in the country. The Reform leader then also failed to mention the issue during a press conference back in Edinburgh on Wednesday. Instead, the party, of course, put out a statement from a spokesperson accusing the government now of cozying up to the EU and leaving us entangled in reams of retained EU law. But Labour officials are, of course, very open now about trying to draw Farage into a fight they now believe he cannot win. Since we signed our reset deal, Farage has just sat there like a lemon and chucked out just a few source quotes to his core audience. It is about time he answered questions on his approach to EU relations. This has been said a lot. Bring back up Brexit. We're almost at this point 10 years since the referendum. No, 2016, yeah, Tom. Yeah, we're well over 10 years at this point. Technically, of course, if you want to say 2020 was when Brexit happened, but, 5 years. But again, depending where you want to go from. But yeah, it's an attack angle Labour should be going after him on. And I am glad to see that is one that they are trying to get him into, because remember, Farage made a lot of promises about Brexit, promises that, again, have not come true. And of course, if he wants to be Prime Minister, then he should have to ask questions on his approach of how he would handle EU relations. So, can they draw out Farage on this? If he's not going to talk, then just start filling the airwaves. Force him to speak on the issue. So, back to this. Judging by Farage's silence on the issue on Wednesday, the Reform leader can, of course, read the polls just as well as Thomas-Symonds. And a survey, of course, by More in Common last Wednesday showed that 54% of voters now believe that close relations with the EU would be good for Britain, while only 18% of voters disagree. Voters are, of course, now even willing to undermine British sovereignty to boost the economy, with 44% saying the government should prioritize the economic compared with 38 who said it should focus on sovereignty. So even that, what should Britain prioritize, the economy or its sovereignty? 44 to 38. That is a very, very clear direction where this is going. But there is still, I think, a lot of hesitance to relitigate the Brexit debate, to re-talk about it, to reopen those wounds. I think that is, of course, still there. But there are more ways you can sort of talk about this without reopening the question of Brexit. Sort of close relations with the EU. If economic alignment is good for the UK, that's not necessarily, a Brexit argument. But if it's that good and it has that benefit, and you can show that benefit to a point where even like the Conservatives wouldn't do anything about it because they know that messing with that would damage the UK economy, you can then turn around, as always, and say, what was the point of Brexit then? If this agreement, if that cooperation is good, why not deepen that cooperation? Why not just rejoin the EU? This is always back to the path that I always said. Always back to the path we always said on eventually how we would end up rejoining. But anyway, back to this. Luke Tyrrell, of course, the executive director for More in Common, said that rather than, of course, wanting politicians to relitigate Brexit, most now want to focus on it being the practical discussions that work on how to balance the economic benefits of a closer relationship without protecting national control. There are, of course, limits to Labour's increasing vocal desire to be closer to the EU, however. Thomas-Symonds said that it would, of course, not countenance re-entering the single market or a customs union, which, again, is fine for the moment. Like I say, if that at the moment is still their red line, that's fine. Because the more they advance the economic arguments, the more they do that, then the question now becomes, well, hold on, why aren't we in the single market? Why aren't we then in the customs union? Let them cook on this. Because the more they show those economic agreements, the more they show how good a closer relationship can be. Why aren't we in the single market? Why aren't we in the customs union? So it's slowly but surely happening the way I said it would. So he also went on to say about that, this is, of course, isn't about revisiting issues of the past. It is about now a ruthlessly pragmatic assessment now of the national interest today, he said. There are, of course, limits, of course, about how a successful election strategy, of course, it could be. While voters, of course, do not want to trade more closely with Britain's European neighbours, they do care about the issue far less than what Farage has spent the last 2 days, of course, talking about irregular immigration. According now to the latest figures from YouGov, 51% of voters put immigration alone as their top 3 priorities, compared to just 10% who listed Britain leaving the EU. So you can see how quickly that has fallen down voters' priorities. Would it be a successful election strategy? Who knows? But I will say this, let them cook on this. I would love us to rejoin the single market and customs union. I would love us to be back, a full member of the EU. But you need those arguments. You need those close relations, because then you can go, well, look how good this is. Look how good it is. Why did we leave the single market? Why aren't we in the single market? Why aren't we in the customs union on this? The more these get rebuilt, the more those questions are going to come back. We've all seen the polls. We all know which direction they're going in. Very, very much so. So it is, I think, only a matter of time before, once again, very, very much so, we will probably rejoin the EU. We will do it in my lifetime. We will do it in my lifetime. I tell you that now. 20 years, maybe. Who knows? But as always, let me know what you think about all this down below, of course, as well. And of course, we'll see you all next time.